Georgie Boy is widely considered the worst of all the actors to don the infamous Batsuit. While his stint as the Caped Crusader certainly wasn't the highlight of his career, nor was it a particularly bright spot in the history of the Batman character, it also wasn't as bad as people make it out to be. If anything, it's in last place because there's been so many iconic portrayals of the character. Everybody loves the Michael Keaton version of Batman, and Christian Bale played the role for some of the brand's greatest films. Even Val Kilmer wasn't half bad. We can talk about Ben Affleck another time. Clooney's Batman was odd because it was a bit too slapsticky. For crying out loud, why did this costume have to have fake nipples on it? There's a lot of creative decisions that made little sense, but it's unfair for all of the blame to be dumped on Clooney. He's a fine actor who did his best under the circumstances.
Doesn't quite cover it.
And it would be cool to see him get another chance, especially now as an older, more sophisticated, and grizzled version of the character. The DCEU has somewhat of a checkered past. Lately, they've come around and started putting out some pretty solid movies.
But we're worth saving.
However, a couple of years back when they were really just getting things started, it was bust after bust after bust. Perhaps the biggest bust of all was the highly anticipated Suicide Squad. The movie had a slew of big names playing a bunch of iconic characters, and audiences were stoked to see the villain-centric flick come to fruition. Then it did, and it was a complicated, disappointing mess. One of the only bright spots in the movie was Will Smith, who's never really bad in anything he does. Will plays Deadshot, a cool character with an awesome redemption story arc, plus it's just fun to see Will Smith and his squeaky clean image play a bad guy. They are giving Suicide Squad another try, this time led by director James Gunn, but unfortunately Deadshot will not be a returning character. It would have been nice to see, but here's hoping the next Suicide Squad is better than the last, with or without Will Smith. Punisher is always a tough character to portray because he kind of tiptoes the line between good guy and bad guy. I mean, sure, he's a protagonist, but his style of justice and his personality are far from role model. Thomas Jane did a surprisingly good job encompassing the character and all of its subtle intricacies. It's a challenge to play a somewhat morally corrupt crime fighter. There's a lot of contrast going on there, so it takes a skilled performer to pull off both sides of it. Jane did a good job, but unfortunately for everyone involved, the movie kind of sucked. If anything, it was a weak script. If the script isn't great, then it's really tough to be a great movie. It would be nice to see Thomas Jane get another crack at the role. Interestingly enough, he did play Frank Castle in a short film a few years ago, but we'd like a full movie, please. Sony had big plans for the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, so much so in fact that Amazing Spider-Man 2 introduced a bevy of secondary characters that were supposed to spin off into their own movies. Black Cat, portrayed by Felicity Jones, is one of those characters who made a cameo, with the expectation being that a standalone Black Cat movie was in the works. Only, Spider-Man 2 didn't perform quite as well as Sony had hoped, and the entire game plan was scrapped. It's a shame, because Felicity Jones is an excellent actor, and a Black Cat movie had a lot of potential. For those unfamiliar with the character, it's sort of like Marvel's answer for Catwoman. Same, but different. It would have been nice to see Marvel build out somewhat of a universe back then, but who knows how that would have affected their eventual plunge into the MCU just 4 years later.
Okay, great, yeah, alright.
So maybe it's a good thing that things worked out the way they did. The crazy thing about those awful X-Men movies is how many awesome characters they featured. Seriously, if they spun off a few of those as part of the MCU now, they'd all be total home runs. It's tough to pick which one mutant would benefit from another chance, because there's so many quality ones. But the answer has to be Nightcrawler. The role was portrayed by Alan Cumming in X2, X-Men United. Cumming was actually on his game in the role. The Nightcrawler character is a mutant who can transport at will to another location. He even opened the movie with a really awesome action scene inside of the White House that set the tone for the rest of the movie to be a steady decline. Unfortunately, that small part was the only time Alan Cumming got to play the role of Nightcrawler. Now that Disney owns all of the Fox assets, there's a chance to see the character on screen again in the near future. Here's hoping Alan Cumming is cast yet again. Alright, now that we've discussed 5 actors who deserve another shot, let's talk about 5 who certainly do not. David Harbour found widespread success in his breakout role as Jim Hopper in Stranger Things. Here's hoping Harbour's next superhero movie turns out better than his last one, Hellboy.
And I apologize again.
Of course, the Hellboy character is synonymous with Ron Perlman, who is closely linked to the role. When the series got rebooted, Harbour was cast in his stead, with some pretty massive shoes to fill. He came short by a large margin, and the Hellboy reboot was an utter failure.
Here we are.
They should absolutely not, under any circumstance, make another Hellboy unless it's Ron Perlman. I don't care how great David Harbour is in everything else he does, nobody else gets to be Hellboy. Ooh, Sorry, Ben Affleck, but you're kinda over two there, bud. Not only was your stint as Batman a relatively unsuccessful one, but your first attempt at being a superhero didn't go much better either. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, in 2003, Affleck portrayed the character Daredevil. It's an interesting character, but they just couldn't seem to find their footing while making it. The script was all over the place, the tone was confusing, and Affleck's performance was definitely not one of his best. The film had high expectations. This was also during the superhero boom of the early 2000s, when the genre of movie was surging. For a number of reasons, though, it flopped.
I missed. I never miss.
And make no mistake, Ben Affleck is a great actor and a really, really talented individual. It's just, well, maybe superhero movies aren't for him. Speaking of Halle Berry, her track record in superhero movies doesn't look too great either, but she was also cast as the iconic character Catwoman. It's a character that tiptoes the line between good and bad, who can play either antagonist or protagonist. It's definitely a character with a lot of depth and room for creativity, and a talented actor like Halle Berry should have knocked it out of the park. Only she didn't. The movie actually kinda sucked. It got terrible reviews and was a major disaster at the box office. She somewhat redeemed herself by being a total badass in John Wick 3, a fantastic movie by all measures. Although, does John Wick qualify as a superhero? We guess that's another debate for another day. Feel free to comment in the section below. Let me just be clear. Seth Rogen is great. As a comedic performer, he's one of the greatest of all time. He's likable, he's hilarious, and he's a surprisingly decent actor. Pretty much anything he does is amazing. But who had the bright idea to try and make him a superhero?
Right, fine, okay.
If there's one thing that Seth Rogen is not, it's a superhero. When you think superhero, you think of a fit badass. You don't think of the stoner that you went to high school with. And of all the heroes, Green Hornet was one of the worst possible choices.
Whoa. Whoa, no, over here. Not the mixed one, not the mixed one here.
Britt Reed is a rich playboy. Nothing about Seth Rogen screams rich playboy. If anything, he has much stronger summer counselor vibes. Needless to say, the experiment did not go well. Rogen tried leaning into his strengths by making it more of a comedic take on the character than the comic book source material, but it just didn't work. Actually, saying it didn't work is the most polite way that I can possibly put it. Thank whatever god you do or don't pray to that this one didn't work out. Because if it did, then the butterfly effects of that means Deadpool never happens. And Deadpool is very, very good, and we should all be very, very grateful that it exists. Look, things don't always work out on the first try. Sometimes you gotta try on a couple of different shoes before you find one that really feels right, you know?
I know, right?
Ryan Reynolds took his first swing at a superhero film in 2011, portraying Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern. In short, it sucked. Reynolds was totally wrong for the role. Or should I say, the role was totally wrong for Reynolds. Because just 5 years later, he was cast to play Wade Wilson, and an actor has never been more perfect for a role than that.
Oh, hello.
All things considered, Ryan should never, ever take up the Green Lantern role ever again.